Namaste. Welcome to the Atharva Forum. Today we have Anand Viswanathan with us for a conversation. Anand is a recipient of Young Historian of Science Award by the Indian National Science Academy for the year 2021. He is currently a researcher at the Center for Ancient History and Culture, Jain University, Bangalore, where he studies Jyotiṣam and other scientific information embedded in ancient texts from the Vedic times. I request the audience to subscribe to this channel, the Atharva Forum.
Thank you for this opportunity, Atharva Forum.
The work that led to your award as a young historian of science. Can you talk about the work that led to that? And I'm sure it is related to the Jyotisha Parampara, and we can build from there as we go along.
It is by Indian National Science Academy, which encourages research on ancient Indian sciences. So the papers published by the journal run by Indian National Science Academy focuses on ancient Indian science. The journal is called Indian Journal of History of Science. As we know, Jyotiṣam is a Kala Nirnaya Shastra. So Kala Nirnaya Shastram for what? That is the question. So Kala Nirnaya Shastram for all of our day-to-day activities, including our rituals, agriculture, and so on and so forth. So this is the purpose of the Shastram as told in ancient texts. The whole of this parampara has developed so much that amongst all the sciences in India, this is very well known. So India is really known for its astronomy and mathematics contributions, even till today. In fact, new facts are being found every day. At this point, what I would like to do is to talk about how this history is studied in general. Around 150 years ago, or maybe, around 150 years ago, there was a scholar named S.B. Dikshit. What he did was he wanted to study the entire parampara of Jyotiṣam, right from Vedic times till today, as much as we can get information on. What he found through his studies is that broadly, to study it historically, the development, he wanted to divide the whole parampara into two phases. And he called it Pre-Siddhantic and Siddhantic. Let me just explain what these terms are. So Siddhanta is the term used for the astronomical models that are proposed by scholars and astronomers like Aryabhata, Bhaskara, and so on. This phase can be called Siddhanta. And anything that comes before, he called it Pre-Siddhanta. Now, let us be clear that these two terms are modern. The ancients themselves did not coin these two terms. What they have done is something slightly different. What Pre-Siddhantic constitutes is some very important area where I want to focus on because this is an area which is less studied by scholars in general. Whereas Siddhantic is the parampara that is being studied. It's very famous. It has been studied by many scholars. For example, what is Siddhanta? Anything that comes from Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, Lallacharya, and then there are two Bhaskaras in our parampara, and the whole of this Kerala school of astronomy. Some scholars like Professor C.K. Raju would like to call us Kerala School of Aryabhatan Astronomy because Aryabhata is the source for them. But then they have developed it so much that it has become its own school. There are many famous persons like Madhava, Sangamagrama Madhava, Nilakantha Somayaji, Jyeshtadeva, and later Shankaravarma, so many other Vidwans in this parampara. This is well studied, it has been published, and it is very well known. But what is less known is what is called Pre-Siddhantic by S.B. Dikshit. Now, what is this Pre-Siddhantic? And why is this term used? Is something that we need to see. What the ancients themselves called this is actually Jyotiṣam, either Jyotiṣam, Jyotiṣam, or Jyotish Shastram. And it was part of Vedangam before, and then later on it was part of Samhita. For example, in Narada Samhita, there is a shloka like this. Siddhanta Samhita Horakyam Skandhatrayatmakam Vedasya Nirmalam Chakshur Jyotishshastram Anuttamam. What he says here is all of Jyotisham or Jyotisham is divided into three. One is Siddhantaha, another is Samhita, another is Hora. What we find is whatever was done 2000 years ago before Shaka era started. Now we are in 1944 Shaka. Shaka is the standard time, long count used in Indian astronomy and in all other texts, major texts, and also epigraphic texts. So I would like to use that as a measure. So in this, whatever was there done 2000 years ago, that is being included into Samhita of later times. Whereas whatever was called as Siddhanta in later times is actually more of a model-based astronomy which did not exist 2000 years ago. Now, before moving on further, let me briefly describe how this distinction is made. Can it really be made is a question, but it has been made based on a few characteristics of texts that we see before Shaka and after Shaka, roughly speaking. So one important difference that is seen is Varam. So Vara is weekday. So this weekday concept, 7 weekdays, is seen predominantly in all the Siddhanta Granthas, starting from Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiyam, Brahmasputa Siddhantaha, all of these works. But if you go back before that, the concept of Vara is not there. The 7-day week is not there. There may be concepts like groups of 7 days or groups of 6 days, but this concept of a week where each day is based on a graha, or a graha is adhipati for a particular day, is not found. Even in texts like Mahabharatam and other earlier texts. So this is one major distinction. Why it is a major distinction is something which we will understand if we go deeper into it, because later Siddhantic astronomy is heavily based on the planets as well as Varam, weekdays. But the kind of astronomy and Kala Ganana that was there before this time is different. It doesn't include the 7 days. So this is one difference. The other major difference we see is in Pre-Siddhantic, or what we call Vedāṅgam and Vedāṅga-Jyotiṣam, there is more observation. It's an observational astronomy parampara. There is calculation. For example, Lāgadhajyotiṣa Vedāṅga-Jyotiṣam or Jyotisha Grantha by Lāgadha has calculation. But then that calculation is in its own way. He does this. But it is not exactly connected to the Siddhanta calculations that Aryabhata does and later astronomers do. So, and why I would say that would be because there are large numbers starting from the Kalpadi, how many revolutions have happened for each planet, or Pataha. All of these numbers are very, very important in Siddhantic astronomy, whereas these numbers are not found in Pre-Siddhantic astronomical works. And there are models, like there is an epicycle model starting from Aryabhata Surya Siddhanta time. But before that, we don't find this model in our astronomical texts. One more distinction that is not specific to astronomy, but also generally, culturally also it is found, is like this. Texts which are over 2000 years old are layered, in the sense there will be a Jnana Parampara that is started by a Rishi, and then his Parampara, his Sishyas, and maybe even his family members, they will all go on to add more information as they find fit. So it becomes like an encyclopedia work. That is why most of the names are like Samhita, Parashara Samhita, Garga Samhita, Vasishtha Samhita, Vṛddha Vasishtha Samhita. So names are like this. Whereas in the later period, we find that single author texts are more prevalent. For example, Aryabhatiyam is by Aryabhata. It's simple. Even though you may have Parampara Bhashyani in the Parampara, Parampara will have Bhashyam, Upabhashyam, Tika, and so on and so forth. Even in other languages also it's possible. For example, there are Malayalam commentaries on Aryabhatiyam and so on. But the author is generally known, even though authors' other details may not be known. But the older works are more layered. This is found in even other paramparas like Natyashastra parampara and so on. So that is found even between Pre-Siddhantic and Siddhantic paramparas. One more difference that is seen is comets observation of such natural phenomena is very given lot of importance in Pre-Siddhantic, whereas in Siddhanta, Panchangam and calculations are given more importance. It's difficult to say they are mutually exclusive, because aspects of this are found in the other side, aspects of that is found here also. But then this is based on pradhana amshaha, something that is most important and seen a lot between the two paramparas. So that is a kind of distinction.
Very, very interesting. I'm glad you kind of laid out how to reason with the various scientific traditions of our Jnana Parampara, including Jyotiṣa Shastram, Kala Nirnaya Shastram, and how we try to kind of reason with it as pre-Siddhantic, post-Siddhantic, where one is more observation-based, one is more model-based, and kind of, while this is an artificial boundary, it helps us kind of partition the various phases and try to understand with them. This is a very interesting sequence of timeline that you have presented for us to reason with the Jyotiṣa Parampara.
The work that I presented in this is movement of Mars as depicted in Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam. Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam is a text that is part of Pre-Siddhantic that I was mentioning before. It is a parampara where the Gargarishi started the parampara, and his Shishyas actually continued it and updated the information as they saw fit. One chapter is Angarakacharaha, where they describe movement of Mars. Movement of Mars is explained later on also in Siddhantic astronomy, but the speciality of this particular chapter is this is the first time in Indian history of science where numbers, concrete numbers based on observations are recorded in a particular chapter on movement of a planet. Not other planets are also part of Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa. Since it is Mars, for Mars, first time it is explained here. So what are these numbers? Briefly speaking, it is about invisibility, how many months it is invisible, and where it rises and where it goes Vakram. Vakram is the retrograde motion. So my work was based on this text which describes this, and I tried to verify if it is realistic. And I found that it is realistic. There are some portions which are hard to verify, but overall it is very realistic, and it's the observational parampara that is in full flow. And it's a remarkable text on that.
So
and
this
since
this observation would have required multiple cycles of observation, right? It is not like a one point observation. Was that your finding as well?
Yes, that is true, because they describe 5 types of retrograde motion, 5 types of invisibility, and so on. If we collect data through modern softwares, I would say around 30 or 32 years observation is minimum needed to come to this conclusion or a pattern. So at least several decades of observation is behind this. That much we can say.
So this, you said these observations were recorded in a chapter of Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa. So Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa is part of the pre-Siddhantic text, if I understand right. Is it correct?
Yes, that is correct. What you are saying is correct. Vṛddhagārgīyajyotisham is one of the major texts that has survived from this time period. And according to itself, it is called as Vedangas. So what the authors say is we are part of Vedāṅgam. That Jyotiṣam, which is Vedāṅgam, and it is one of the important tools to explain the Veda and its meaning.
What are the other Vedāṅga-Jyotiṣam texts? And just like you explained pre-Siddhantic and Siddhantic, is there a way to reason with the corpus of work in the pre-Siddhantic among the pre-Siddhantic works?
Yes, the scholars who are studying this field currently, how generally they are classifying the texts could be explained like this. So before Shaka, there were many kinds of texts. One is the Vaidika Parampara. where all the 4 Vedas come into picture. By 4 Vedas, what I mean is Samhita, Brahmanam, Aranyakam, Upanishad. Only till that I am restricting. And there are other ancillary texts. By ancillary, I would include Vedāngam. There are Shad Vedāngani, Isha, Vyakaranam, and so on, where Jyotiṣam is also one of the 6 Vedangas. So as part of Vedāngam, Jyotiṣam, there are many texts. 2 or 3 roughly survive. There were other texts that we know from reading these other texts. And other books could be Grihya Sutram, Shrauta Sutram. These kinds of sutrams also have astronomical information. They are not per se astronomical texts. They are not Shastras on astronomy, but the way they describe uses the astronomy of that time. So we get to know that. And then there are other works which you can say Kavyam and Shastram of that period. For example, Arthashastra, Natyashastra, and Bhasa Kavi. Bhasa Kavi has many natakams that he has written. Bhasa Nataka Chakram it is called, whatever is remaining. Even these works belong to that period, and they also reflect the kind of astronomy that is there. Even Tripitakam, Buddhist texts, including Tripitakam, Shardula Karnavadanam. These are also texts where, even though they are not texts on astronomy as such, but they use this knowledge to explain whatever is their goal. So, broadly speaking, these are the 3 or 4 divisions we can make. One are the 4 Vedas directly, and Vedāngam, where Jyotiṣam itself is a Vedāngam, and there are others like Grihya Sutram, etc. And then there are other texts like Shastra Granthaha, Natyashastram, Arthashastram, where we get a picture. For example, Arthashastram does not have any weekdays. So we know that is the kind of astronomy in that period. So these are the source texts, I would say, of that period.
So, and between Vedāngam and the Vedas, is the quality of information different, or the organization of information different? And the second question is, even to study these ancient manuscripts or granthas, what is the biggest challenge you have? Are these readily published, or you have to hunt for the source and get the information?
The nature of texts are also different. Nature of Pre-Siddhantic texts are different compared to Siddhantic texts. But even within the Pre-Siddhantic texts, there are qualitative differences. The Veda mantraha, Vedas are made of mantraha. So these mantras are very cryptic at times. So the language has changed, or the meanings of words have changed, and it is very difficult to understand the environment in which the rishis saw these mantra drashtar. Rishis are called mantra drashta. What happens is, if we go by Yaskacharya's idea that there could be multiple meanings for mantras. Even after that kind of understanding, it's sometimes difficult to cull out the meaning from Veda mantra, but it has been done based on Yaska's commentary or Tippani and Sayanacharya's Bhashyam and so on. But when we come to Vedanga texts, where other than Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam that I mentioned before, there is a work called Parashara Tantram that has been published by Professor R.N. Iyengar about 9 years ago. And Lāgadhajyotiṣa Vedāṅga-s, even though the text itself is called Vedāṅga-s, it is by Lāgadha. What happens in these texts is it's more clear, and it is the Shastram that they are trying to write on astronomy. So those texts are relatively clearer to understand. So that is the distinction that I would make. The other texts are anyway reflecting the astronomical knowledge of those times, and they are not as such astronomical texts. So that is what I would say.
True. And anecdotally, I have know that in Yajurveda there is the Nakshatravali is there, and I also probably heard of some astronomical information embedded within Samaganam. So, are there any interesting illustrative examples that we could explore to see what kind of information is embedded there and how to relate to them?
Very briefly, I will tell you the thought behind how mantras are studied. So, what is the framework in this whole thing is, it is thought that mantras have at least 3 different meanings, or could have 3 meanings. in the framework of adhiyajñam, adhidaivatam, and adhyātma. What these are like this. So if the mantra's meaning is studied in the context of yajña and performance of yajña, then it is adhiyajñam. The second one is adhidaivatam or adhidaivam. Both words are found. Adhidaivam essentially means something which is natural phenomenon. Divi bhutam, divyam, daivam, all these words come from divi. Divi is in the physical representation, it is the akasha. So any physical object that is seen, physical interpretation comes in adhidaivatam. Adhyātmam, ātmani iti adhyātmam. Atma can mean both the atma that is forever there as well as the shariram. So anything inside this body, whichever is connected with the self, is called adhyātma. So if we take the word soma, for example, it's a very, very famous example. So I keep giving this example. Soma, in terms of yajña, it means soma lata, very famous. And you press the soma and give it as ahuti and so on and so forth. So this is soma in adhiyajña sense. If you go to adhidaivatam, then it actually means the moon that we see. Chandramaha, chandraha, somaha, all of these are paryaya padani for moon that we know. So somaha in adhidaivatam sense is the moon. Soma in the sense of adhyātma will be the manaha. Chandrama manaso jataha is a very famous one in Purusha Suktam, which we know. So somaha is the representative of manas. In adhyātma sense, it is the manas. Similarly, ketuhu is comet in adhidaivatam sense. But if you want to call it by some other meaning, then any flag is also called as ketu. Or in adhiyajña sense, the smoke that comes up, that forms a banner kind of thing, that is called ketu. In adhyātma sense, it is called as prajña or buddhi. Different concepts, words as well as mantras can have 2, 3 and even sometimes more meanings. So this is a framework which we need to understand. Now, coming to your actual question as to are there any interesting things that we can study, I will briefly go over some of them. So one is the comet imagery in the Vedas. So this is there right from the Rigveda Samhita, and it is there found in other places also. Dhumaketuhu, and these words which we use today is very, very old, those words. So they are found even in Rigveda. There, comets are being discussed. So it is called Agnihi only. The Agni is of many, many types. Comets are also included and called as Agni, in that word Agni. But with their descriptions, we know it is actually a comet, because they will say this Agni is going in the sky and it has a Shikha or Valavan. Valaha is the tail, either tail or Shikha. So this is described. And there is also Marut, which are Devatas in the Veda. What do these Marut stand for? If we study the Suktas of Marut, there are many, many mantras in Rigveda itself on Maruts. What we can infer from that is that it is a meteorite shower. Even though the word Marut in later Sanskritam, it means winds or groups of winds. In Rigveda, what happens is they come in groups of 7, 49, or even thousands of them come as a group that is there, and they make a lot of noise and they are very bright and then fall from the sky. Then the prayers to them are almost like, please don't destroy us. Those kinds of prayers are there. So from all those descriptions, we know it could be most likely a meteorite shower that they are describing. So this is one kind of astronomical observation we get from the Vedas. One more is very famous. It's Chandraha. So Chandra is said to have 27 wives or 28 wives, and Prajapati curses him because he spends more time with Rohini, and he is consumed by consumption. Actually, Raja Yakshma is the word used. Today's term, it should be tuberculosis. So so all this encoding is about his waxing and waning, as well as going around the ecliptic with the 27 nakshatrani. And there is more information in this katha also. This is also found in Vedas. It is later encoded in the Puranas also in slightly different ways, in an expanded way. This is one more. And one more interesting thing is the pole star. Dhruva. So Dhruva, but Dhruva word itself means firm, fixed. Now, why is he fixed, or what is fixed? So through research, it has been found that around 4,800 years before present, there was a constellation called Śiśumāra. Śiśumāra, see, constellations are usually identified with a shape. So this Śiśumāra was identified with a sea creature, Jalacharaha. It could be a dolphin, it could be Gangetic dolphin, but there are other ideas on what this aquatic animal could be. But what is said in the way some of the mantras is that this Śiśumāra exists in the northern region, and at the tail of Śiśumāra there is a Dhruva. It is fixed. So if we go back and analyze what was the sky picture back then, now the question is, why would the sky picture be different back then? That is due to precession of the equinoxes, which I wouldn't explain. It is generally the axis of Earth makes a conical movement over 25,770 years, because of which every few hundred years a visible change in the sky is seen. The position of stars and so on change, nakshatrani. So this Dhruva, 4,800 years ago, there was a particular Tara or a star that was almost in the direction of the Earth's axis of rotation. So it will appear in the sky to be very stationary. The others would move, but this Dhruva will be in that same position. So this they recognized as Dhruva, and they thought this was the controlling factor around which all of this cosmos moves around. That was a model. And this is, Dhruva is also called Abhaya in Taittiriya Shaka. So this is one interesting fact that is found in the in Vedic texts, slightly developed in later Puranas also. And there is one more thing that I would like to say, after which we can move on to the other topics, which is Darśapūrṇamāsa Vedi. So this Darśapūrṇamāsa is an important yaga that is almost like a fundamental yaga. If you have to do anything else, this is a must. That is the kind, it's like our Sandhya Vandanam. So this Darśapūrṇamāsa yaga has a setup where there are 4 different Vedis involved. One is a circle, one is a square, one is a semicircle, and so on. Actually, that is the point where squaring the circle concept and all this pya ratios have come up. Pya, by pya I mean pi. There is a Vedi in between, which is like this shape, where there is no Agni, but there is some other Kriya that is there. Now, the shape of this Vedi is very peculiar. It is not seen in any other Yajña, and that is one. And why is this shape, and why is this involved with Darśapūrṇamāsa, or the cycle of the moon? This is a major question. When researchers analyze this question, what was found is that this ultimately traces a 18-year cycle, eclipse cycle of the moon, where 3,339 tithis pass by during the waning phase of the moon. This number 3339 is also special because it occurs 2 times in the Rig Veda, where it is understood with the help of Puranas also that 3,339 devas or Vishwe devas drink the moon or drink Soma during Krishna Paksha. They have been keeping a count of all the Krishna Paksha tithis, and after 18 plus years, the same configuration of eclipse occurred. So they thought, oh, this is a cycle, and that is why 3339 number is important. There are so many other numbers like this. Some of them we know the importance. These are some of the important astronomical observations that we can immediately see in the Vedas. And of course, I have not talked about cosmology. That is a different field separately, how the world was created and how we visualize the whole cosmos. This is all also part of Vedic astronomy, I would say. In Nasadiya Suktam, Purusha Suktam, Hiranyagarbha Suktam, so on and so forth. Asyavamiya Suktam in the first mandala of Rig Veda. In very, very briefly, I have explained this because this merits a book by itself.
Understood. So building on, the second part of the question was just to complete it, for the research work that you did for Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam, or even you mentioned Parashara-tantram, what was the source material, and what are the challenges in studying this material, and I get a sense that your intention is to be as close to the source of truth as possible and not to depend on some translations or other interpretation. So I just want you to talk about what are the challenges and what is the process by which you collect and analyze information.
Regarding the Vedic texts itself, we relied on published books as well as manuscripts. In fact, that is the same procedure we take for other works also. For example, the Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam text that I talked about before, where Angarakachara was the work I did. What happens is, there are published editions of some of these works, not all, but even in the published editions, they would have used, say, 3 or 4 manuscripts. But then there are other existing manuscripts which could inform your reading better. Not always, but sometimes we observe this. So, with respect to Vedic texts, we have been utilizing published texts, and there are other manuscripts also. With respect to Vedanga texts, I will briefly tell you how these texts have been gotten into print. One is Parashara Tantram. It is by Rishi Parashara and his Parampara. The unfortunate thing with this Parampara is that we don't really get any manuscripts written by Parashara that has been copied, obviously copied across the centuries. We don't really get these texts. So, Bṛhatsaṃhitā of Varāhamihira, which is a very, very famous text, and he is also a very famous scholar, mentions Parashara and Garga sometimes. But more than that, Bṛhatsaṃhitā has commentaries, one by Utpala Deva, Utpala Vivritihi it is called. This, many places in this Vyakhyanam, we find Parashara is being quoted. Tathacha Parasharaha, Ityaha Parasharaha, Ityaha Gargaha, Ityaha Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa, so on and so forth. So, what Professor R.N. Iyengar did here is to cull out all the sources where the commentaries say Ityaha Parasharaha, and then he has combined them together and made chapters of this and published a construction of this text along with his own analysis. So this is how Parashara Tantram text exists today. Whereas Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam is a completely different story. That is also quoted often by commentators on Bṛhatsaṃhitā. But what is fortunate in the case of Vṛddhagārga and his Parampara is that we get manuscripts. There are manuscripts across the country. In fact, we got one from UK, France, and so on also, where there is a text that starts with a particular Mangalapadyam, Jagad Vidhatre, it starts. This is the text of Vṛddhagārga. Through study, this has been found. And at this center, what we work on is to collate these manuscripts, see the readings, and get a variants down in footnotes, and also try to fix the reading which is most intelligible and also easily readable. And this will be the source text for further research. So, even in published text, for example, let me go to the other one which is very, very famous, Lāgadhajyotiṣa, Lāgadhajyotiṣam. It is a very famous text. But then when we visited Varanasi, there we found that there are more manuscripts on the same text. These manuscripts have not been taken into account while publishing all of these editions, different editions by different scholars. So, if we can get hold of manuscripts, we prefer manuscripts because those are directly primary texts. If not, then we will use secondary text, which is published text. In fact, they are not secondary text, they are published texts. So, this is the generally the source material.
Yeah, on the manuscript itself. So, just curiously, I want to know what is the medium of the manuscript and what kind of script or lipi is used on them. Typically, is there a dominant one there, or is there variety there? And if there is a new script, how do you navigate the landscape of new scripts?
Yeah, this is a manuscriptology related question where, fortunately for us, what happened is most of the manuscripts that we got were in Devanagari Lipi. But still, Grantha Lipi, Nandinagari Lipi are some of the lipis used in the south in olden times. Devanagari was used very less in the south. In the north, Devanagari was used, but then Sharada Lipi was also very, very prevalent, and Ranjana Lipi. in Mithila area and so on, Ranjana Lipi, and then there is Vanga Lipi also in Bengal. We got one Sharada manuscript online. We haven't got it physically, the scan of Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa, whatever. It could be a part of this whole text also. That is all possible. And one in Bengali Lipi. For example, I cannot read Bengali Lipi, let alone Old Bengali. So what we did is, there was another researcher at our center who volunteered for this work. She learned this Lipi by herself, and she has tried to read it and help us with this. If there is a Lipi which needs lot of work, then we try to consult other scholars who are working with those Lipis. That is how it works.
Very nice. Move on to Siddhantic astronomy, a phase of Siddhantic astronomy. Is the Siddhantic astronomy tradition still alive? You mentioned the Kerala school of mathematics that could be 600, 700 years ago. And, some of the other traditions are much, much older. So to me, it looks like it's a continuous living tradition, and probably it's still alive, and probably most of us are not fully aware of it. If you could just enlighten us about, how these traditions are and what is your assessment of their health right now?
So what has happened with our astronomical paramparas is that the new thought process, or the something that is navinyam, we call in Sanskritam, where you keep on doing new things, not for the sake of it, but it is for parishkara. You try to observe, and then you try to correct your models based on your observation. Nilakanta Somayaji, for example, clearly says that several siddhantas are different, each one conflicts with the other, and so on. But then observation. For example, Darshanam Ganitan Chaiva Yugapad Yoga Sadhakam. This is not a new message. It is by Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa himself. So the parampara was developed like this. So there was some observation that contradicts the calculation. So they will try to improve the model or improve the constants in the model, and so on and so forth. In the 19th century, for example, we have major astronomer called Samanta Chandrasekhara. He lived in some remote village. In fact, he did not have access to the Kerala Parampara. He was by himself. The only book, the last book that he could access was Bhaskaracharya's Siddhanta Shiromani, which is very, very surprising to us, because we know so much has happened after that. So he was a standalone person who did his own thing. But in the Kerala Parampara, if we see, in early 1800s also, there were scholars who were really working with the help of the Parampara ideas and expanding it. But at that time, the British rule came in a heavy way, and the education system changed. This we are kind of aware of. And so the Parampara itself stagnated there. I wouldn't say it was dead, because they were using the Panchanga Kartaraha, they were using these Siddhantas. Even now there are Panchanga Kartaras who use the Siddhantas according to their own, because we have hundreds of Panchangams in our country, because each is based on one idea or one particular Siddhanta and so on. So if we want to answer the question whether it is alive, in terms of Panchangas, some of them are alive, because there are other Panchangas which don't bother about these ancient Siddhantas. They are on their own. One more interesting thing in this is, in Nepal, there was a scholar named Shivarajachar. He has written a voluminous book on Lāgadhajyotiṣa, Lāgadhas Vedāṅga-s. So there is a small but significant minority of people who want to go back to Lāgadhajyotiṣa type of Panchangam. I wouldn't call it Panchangam, some kind of calendar, because Panchangam will have 5 aspects. Varam was not found in ancient astronomy, but something similar to a Panchangam. They want to do this today. To answer your question very briefly, in this kind of Panchangam scenario, it is alive. But as a very vibrant, active, discussion-oriented tradition which improves on previous knowledge using observation and even latest technology, it is a kind of lackadaisical parampara. It is not really alive. Only research on older texts are being conducted as part of history of science work.
Regarding the Kala Nirnaya aspect of Jyotiṣam versus Phalitajyotisham, is there a way to talk about these things in a meaningful manner? Because when I grew up, or even now, when you say Jyotiṣam, for me, Jyotiṣam is more about predictions and my personal fate, and I have that kind of connotation with Jyotiṣam. But when I hear you, it looks like Jyotiṣam is more observational and modeling. So is there a continuity between these two, or how does one discuss about these things?
So for this, we'll have to start from the ancient times. So how did the parampara look before, and how it changed later? That is something we would like to see. In fact, some of the scholars are of the opinion that a good history of astrology as such has not been written in this country. But that apart, if we look at the Vedanga texts, Parashara Tantram, Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam, we find that they are a mix of several things. They are in fact called as Samhita. So for example, let us take Grahacharaha. It can be Shukracharaha, Angarakacharaha, Adityacharaha, so on. If we take this, what happens is, first of all, the Gati is described. The movement of the planets and so on, that is described. But it is not restricted to that. Now, the question arises, why do you need this? What is the use? So, the use is that, one, you are tracking Tithi and so on. Each Tithi might have a significance. Each Muhurta might have a significance where you are recommended to do a particular kriya in a particular Muhurta or Tithi and so on. But we also find, in addition to that, there is an aspect of predictive astrology, not in the sense of modern astrology, but it would be something like this. If Angaraka is in a particular nakshatram, or he is in conjunction with another graha, then the Saurashtra Pradesha or Magadha Pradesha, this will get destroyed. If he is in some other configuration, then Brahmakshatra Vinashaya. So this particular community or this particular Pradesha will feel the wrath. Sometimes it is written like this also, will feel the wrath of Angaraka. Crops may be destroyed. Sometimes Subhiksham is also there. It is not always destruction. Sometimes they also talk about this particular configuration is good for us. So this is the kind of thing that is found in Pre-Siddhantic. But later, what we associate with horoscope, Kundali, for example, that is a newer phenomena. It is found after Bṛhatsaṃhitā, Varāhamihira, and so on and so forth, where horoscope matching before Vivaha and trying to predict your future. This is something which is more recent, maybe 1500, 1700 years old before present. That is the area, time period where it is there. Before that, it is there, but they really wanted to protect themselves and try to predict something. So that is the continuity we can see. But there is also a discontinuity in the sense of 12 Rashis being used for Phalitajyotisham. This 12 division of ecliptic is there even in Pre-Siddhantic astronomy, but the exact sequence called Mesha, Rishabha and so on, that is not found in any of the earlier texts. It comes later, and it comes heavily also later. It is very, very important, and based on this your future is being predicted and so on. That is a later phenomena. But that was not the only work that happened in Siddhantic period, because as I mentioned before, Siddhanta is one, Hora is another. So they try to say all of these are branches of Jyotiṣam itself. So the word Jyotiṣam does not necessarily mean only Phalitajyotisham or Hora. It includes that as well as Siddhanta, which is very, very heavily astronomical calculation oriented. It's actually Ganitam oriented. So that is how we have to understand this parampara.
Probably they coexisted, the Phalita part and the Ganita part, they coexisted, and that has been our tradition all along. There is no need to artificially distinguish between the two, and they served each other purpose too. Regarding some of the shlokas you mentioned, I don't know if there is any Sama shloka that you can think of that can connect us to the observational aspect of the astronomy. If there is one, and if there is none, we can move on to other topic. I thought you mentioned there are shlokas that can illustrate the connections.
Samaveda as such is based on the riks that are found in Rig Veda. So it's the Sahityam that is important rather than Samaganam. But Samaganam plays its own role. Since I don't have time today, for example, Rathantarena Mimite. So Rathantaram is name of a Sama that is used as a to measure the sun, or it is used to measure the whole of the Veda. These are statements that are found. So Samaganam is important. For example, there is a Varavantiyam, that is name of a Sama, where Valavan means a comet, but this mantra has a particular Sama. But I will skip that today because there are other topics that we need to discuss.
So you please explore the other topics that you think will be interesting in this space. I have some questions, but yeah.
Yes. The other one, I talked very briefly about Vedāṅga-s, that is found in Samhita, Brahmanam, Aranyakam. There is a lot more actually. The Tandya Brahmanam of Samaveda itself is a very huge text. It has so much content and including astronomical observations, so on and so forth. So that needs a separate session. But here I would like to briefly talk about Vedangam texts in the sense of texts like Parashara Tantram, Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam, because Grihya Sutram, those texts are also Vedangam only, belong to Vedangam genre or the group. But here, now quickly, if we want to see what is generally part of these texts, as I explained, Parashara Tantra was put together from other references. Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam, we have texts, manuscripts, and so there are aspects of Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam which will be very interesting to know. What is said in the beginning is Vedāṅga-jyotiṣam has 64 angani, Chatushashtihi angani. There are 64 angas of Vedanga. First time we read it, what 64 angani could be? The interesting part of this is that anything that would be connected with Jyotiṣam will be part of the same Shastra. For example, initially what happens is they say there are 24 angani and then 40 upangani. So the suspicion is that the 24 angani might be the earlier one and more important, and then later they added the upangani, probably. But it is difficult to confirm this. So what happens is after the introductory chapters, let me take the example of Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam just to illustrate. There will be similarities with this when we look into Parashara Tantram also. After the initial introductory chapters, they move on to Grahacharaha. So I'm not listing it in order, but Rahucharaha, Adityacharaha. Adityacharaha comes later. Rahucharaha, Shukracharaha, Angarakacharaha, Budhacharaha, Adityacharaha, Ketumala. Ketumala is about comets. Rahu will be about eclipses, and individual chapters on these Grahacharaha. Then later on, there are other chapters in this 24 scheme of 24 Angani. But one interesting chapter that I would like to highlight is called Mahasalilam. It is the 24th Angam, last of the important Angas, where we see a question and answer parampara. There are two chapters which are part of Mahasalilam. Why I have taken up this Mahasalilam is because it's something very interesting, and how the parampara can be known from this. We have heard of question answer parampara in Upanishads. It's very famous. But in physical sciences, was there a parampara? From this, we know there was a very vibrant parampara. For example, what happens in the first chapter is Vishwamitra Rishi goes to Vṛddhagārgā's ashrama. There, he goes and he does pranam and all this. And then after that, he asks a series of questions. There are more than 95 questions he asks in one breath. And then he becomes silent. Now, what are these questions? It is all physical phenomena involved in it. For example, he asks, Katham Srishtihi, how this whole universe was created. Katham Parvatanam Parvatatvam, Girinam Giritvam. What is the mountainous in mountains? So essentially he's talking about how these are created and what is the essence of these. So mountains, rivers, and also other natural phenomena like Digdaha. You sometimes see the whole disha or the directions. It looks as if they are ablaze. Why is this phenomenon? And Bhukampaha, Ulkapataha, Meghaha, Pravarshanam. So clouds, and how precipitation happens, what is this water cycle, and so on and so forth. He's very curious about anything and everything under the sun. He asks so many questions. That is the first chapter. Then the second chapter is interesting because it reflects the knowledge of those times. So Vṛddhagārga answers these questions, and there he explains what he knows about each of these topics, how they have happened. But some of them we find that there are no answers because I think there are copying errors and it is missing. But then there are very, very many interesting facts in this Mahasalila. So it is a natural science text. So that is one. And then when we go to the Upangam, it has topics like Graha Yuddham, Graha Shringatakam, where recently also we came across two planets which came very, very near. So this is sometimes called occultation in modern parlance. So they believed that if such a thing happens, there will be some effect on Earth for us. So they have discussed these concepts in the Upangas, and then there are Rutam. Rutam is sounds of various animals, the cries. Based on how they make sound, you can there are some omens and portents that are being told. Maybe you infer something is going to happen. These phenomena are explained later on. One more interesting is Dakar Galam, where probably even now some people do this. So how to identify there is water underneath the earth. So that is called Dakar Galam. It is part of Bṛhatsaṃhitā and later Samhita texts also. So these are the broad topics. In fact, I would say the astronomical part of it, most of them are found in the Purvangam or the Pradhana Angani. Even in the later ones like Graha Shringatakam, it is there. But all the astronomical main important points of astronomy that we associate with that period are found in the earlier Grahachara chapters. So I would say this is kind of a very brief look at what constitutes these texts. One more I forgot is Agasthyachara. Agasthyachara is also an important chapter in these books. Why I am saying this, we could have left it, but it is important culturally to us because we have so many lores associated with Agastya. He crossing the Vindhya mountain, he drinks the entire ocean, and so on and so forth. In Chidambaram is important. So Agasthyachara has become very, very important earlier, and that is one area where we see the earlier texts influencing the later texts. Later texts also carry some chapters on Agastya. What I'm saying is Siddhantic period also in some places we find this. Why is this important? Culturally it was important. So these are the kinds of chapters that are found in Vedanga astronomy. So I just wanted to briefly highlight this.
Agastya is interesting also because Agastya is a southern star and maybe more important to us culturally than other cultures. So I understand that.
Yes, that's true. Because there is always this question, right? I haven't really addressed it till now, where this whole astronomy has come from Greece or this has come from Babylon and so on and so forth. So in investigating some of these questions, Agastya becomes important. Because if Agastya plays a very important role in some of this and it is not found in other places, then that becomes a unique point also.
In Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣam, you talked about the movements of the planets, the sun. I'm sure there is the moon, Rahu is also there. In addition to this, how do they reason with comets? Because these objects have some kind of periodicity, but the comets are not too periodic, right? That is what we know from modern knowledge. So I wonder, how was it observation based? Did they try to classify the comets? Is there information around on these aspects of the comet observations?
Yes, it's a very important thing we should understand. There is also a pravada. In the pravada, by pravada I mean there is a kind of accusation where no comet observation was done or comets were not important to Indians. In that aspect, this is gaining importance. Where Parashara and Vṛddhagārga, they have recorded 26 comets. So they say in general there are 101 comets. Ekottaram shatam ketunam. That is the phrase used in many places. Even later, people have copied this. But first time we find these names not of 101, but 26 names are clearly illustrated in both of these texts. In fact, Vṛddhagārga has one more. What they have recorded is something like this: Nama, Phalam, Rupam, and Kalaha. So the description will be something like this. There is a comet that comes. So it can have a name: Asthiketuhu, Swadhiketuhu, Chalaketuhu, and so on. Uddalaka, Uddalakihi. Then there is a Ketu called Kaha. That's all. That is the name of this Ketu. There are 26 names like this. So what they will say is, first there is a Ketu. And how does he look? What is his Rupam? Is he reddish in color or very white in color? That is one point. And then how long is the tail? How long in the sense very short, or sometimes Nabhasi Tribhagam Akramya Tishtati. So it was occupying 1/3 of the visible sky. That is a huge length actually. I have never seen such comets in my life. So that kind of, and then what direction it is facing. So the tail may be facing south or west or whatever, because comets need not necessarily come on the ecliptic. It can come, it can be very haphazard and other ways also. So that is there. And then how many days or weeks it was seen in the sky. Sometimes the path is also described. It passes through the Brahma Rashi, this, and then some other nakshatra, and then disappears. After all of this, what happens is the phalam. Because of this, what happens on earth? What happened or what may happen? So all of this is described for a particular Ketu. And then they immediately say, after 120 years, after this Ketu was seen, the next one, Chalaketu, was seen. And its properties is the properties are being described. And then later, after 308 years after this Ketu, something was seen. Now, from where does it start? That is the question. It starts from Samplavaha. So it was a major flood event that was used as a starting point. I think there was a big natural disaster during that time where there was a huge loss of life, knowledge, and whatnot. After that, it settled down, and then they started seeing other comets, and they used that as a long count. In fact, the long count is also missing in pre-Siddhantic astronomy. Just as a aside, I'm just saying. For example, like a Shaka count, saying 500 Shaka, 1500 Shaka, it is not found in pre-Siddhantic astronomy. But this is one kind of a proxy for this long count. And as your question also pointed out, the cycle of comet, by cycle of a comet or periodicity, we mean something totally different now. What we mean is, this is seen now, 76 years later it will be seen. Or there is one comet which is so oblique that it will be seen 5 million years later. I can't imagine that. But here they have not said this. What they have said is, between each comet, what is the length of time that passed? That's all they say. And it stops with the 26th comet. That observation is seen.
It definitely points to perhaps a multi-generational observation system, and keep recording. Maybe there are comets that that have a periodicity of few hundred years, and there are comets that have a periodicity of many thousand years. So those short comets, probably they were able to identify as a repeating comets, if I understood you right. That is important because it does show that it is an observation-based culture and inference-based culture, as opposed to some mystical, magical culture throughout.
That is true. In fact, when I mentioned the Mahasalilam before, it was very, very empirical parampara, in the sense they wanted to observe, they wanted to understand how something happened. And of course, later on, some of them got frozen and so on. And this comet is definitely a proper observational parampara. And that was the long count. Actually, if you total up these numbers, it comes to roughly 1,300 or 400 years. So it's very surprising. Did they keep track of all of this for 1,400 years? It is possible, because once there was a flood and then there was Shanti after that. Maybe they thrived, the parampara thrived after that. And they kept track of this, and they went on till maybe 1,300 years later also.
As inheritors of this cultural information or protectors of, what do we do as modern Bharatiya citizens to protect the inheritance that we have to nourish it and to build it from where we are right now. What do you think, in your opinion, scholars like you can do and non-scholars or interested parties can do in this field?
Most important thing is first we become aware of what is there. Now, slowly we are getting to know about the contributions of Kerala school of astronomy. I am talking about the Siddhantic period. In fact, this was not even known 50 years ago, 70 years ago, for example. This was not very well known. Up to Bhaskaracharya, people will read, and then Daivajñas, Krishna Daivajña, and so on, Ganesha Daivajña. That parampara was known. So first thing we need to know is we need to become aware of this parampara. The later parampara is also extremely rich. The earlier parampara is less studied, but it is very, very rich in its own way. So first thing is to get to know this. Then, but we don't really want to base our understanding on only secondary and tertiary texts. It is always good to go to the primary texts. And in fact, with respect to Sanskritam of these texts, it's not really that complicated because the period overlaps with Itihasa Purana period. If you read Mahabharatam or Vishnu Puranam, we really know that the Bhasha is very, very simple, straightforward. No complications other than whatever is necessary, that is only used. So we need to access the originals. That is one thing. And whoever knows it needs to spread this information also. And the other aspect is research. So is research needed? Absolutely, it is needed. Because both in Vedic texts, there are many, many things that are unknown, even though the mantras are known. The meaning sometimes is not known or not explored because it's a huge corpus actually. Especially the Brahmanas and Aranyakas are huge. And still there are many, many things at our center. Suddenly we discover something. Oh, this is something new. For example, Venus is something which attracts a lot of attention. We know he is important. We know he has influenced the rainfall cycles and so on and so forth. That when we dig into it, we get more, and we find it is very surprising that it has been missed all these years. That is one. And with respect to manuscriptology that I indicated before, we need more and more and more people who become eligible, who gain knowledge in this, and so that it can be expanded further. For example, Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa, we published 7 chapters till now, and working on 3-4 simultaneously yet to be published. How many does it have? How much of the work have we published? I would say maybe 2% or something like this. I haven't calculated. It has 5,000 shlokas or more, because there are prose parts where it's difficult to sometimes say the length of the prose parts. But this has to be known, to be made known. It has to be published. And not only just this, when I visit manuscript libraries, what happens is, there suddenly I come across a work and it has not been published, and it is related to Jyotiṣa, sometimes Siddhantic, sometimes even Pre-Siddhantic, something like a Samhita. There are 18 Samhitas that are known, like Surya Siddhanta. It's not 18 Samhitas, 18 Siddhantas that are known. Soma Siddhanta is one, Parashara Siddhanta is one. So there are so many Siddhantas which are also not studied in detail. So in terms of what others can contribute, there should be researchers, main research workers on this, but others can also contribute part-time, in the sense there is lot of data that needs to be generated and pattern recognition that needs to be done in this area to validate some of the statements made in these. For example, you have published a paper in about Vṛddhagārgīyajyotiṣa, but that is more related to the date of this text. What could be the date of this text? So when you did, I don't know if you call it number crunching, but that is the term we keep using sometimes. So those are the kind of activities that need to be done. For example, someone with expertise in analyzing data, they can be very useful in this, because unless and until this is available in an analyzable format, we can't proceed further in many cases. And of course, Sanskritists, Samskritagñāha can be also of big help in terms of reading the lipis, in terms of trying to see what this particular thing means, and so on. Unless and until we get into this area, no original output can happen, and no furthering of knowledge in this area can happen, because there are very less number of people working in this particular area. Siddhantic astronomy at least has seen the light of the day to some extent. So that is where I would say first thing is to know, and at least get to know what research has been done in the last 150 years. For example, S.B. Dikshit's book is a good reference, and there are many papers that can also be read. And then second step would be to actually go and see the Sanskritam texts. What kind of texts are these? What is the kind of information that is there? And the other thing is to actually do research. Either primary ones by actually publishing these texts, hunting the texts and trying to publish, and then also secondary research based on the information, validating this information using modern software. For example, in at our center, we use Stellarium and a visibility software called PVis, and MATLAB is sometimes used, so on and so forth. So this is the way this has to go, but it is a very serious work if we need more progress in this area.
So very, very interesting conversation, Anand. And the work that you do and the work that your center does, the Center for Ancient History and Culture, indeed pioneering and showing us the way as to how to reason with our knowledge traditions. And not really a matter of pride, but also a matter of knowing as to what is possible and how we can be proud about our contributions and our knowledge traditions.
And one last thing I would say regarding the importance of this particular work is that it is the source of all later parampara. For example, Siddhantic is a later one. Pre-Siddhantic is obviously the earlier one. And we know our parampara starts from the Vedas and Vedāngam. So since if you don't explore it, then we really are not exploring the roots. We are not going there. And sometimes you can't even answer questions like Greeks gave this to you. How do you know? How do you counter this? I'm not saying countering that must be the only aim of this study. I'm not saying that, but that is part of the reasoning. And several cultural aspects that are later there are influenced from this period. I have talked briefly about this Dhruva. So Dhruva Darshanam is part of Vivahas. Now I don't know if it is there. Arundhati and Vasishta are being shown, but Dhruva is an integral part of a Vivaha. And then there are Brahmotsavas that are part of temples, that sometimes people come and ask me, what is the reason behind this? Why did it come up? In fact, studying pre-Siddhantic astronomy is very important to understand ourselves and our culture also. So that is why I am interested in trying to convey this information. I would encourage all the viewers here to go and access papers of Professor R. Nayangar, and there is another professor called Gondhalekar, and there are such people who have worked on it, right from S.B. Dikshit. Others might be familiar with Tilak, Balagangadhara Tilak. He has published books on this area. There are differences, of course, in the viewpoints and so on, but there are sources like this available. They have published, and this is a good starting point to know what is available in these texts. Thank you. Namaste. Thank you for the opportunity.
On behalf of Atharva Forum, thank you very much, Anand.